I remember exactly the day it began. Not because of the date printed at the top of the menu, not because of the wine we pretended to enjoy, but because of the sound of my son tapping his fork against a champagne flute. That small, metallic ping cut through the room like a blade disguised as celebration. It was his engagement dinner, the first official meeting of both families. I'd imagined a night of simple joy, new memories, easy laughter. Instead, it was the night I learned how love, mixed with money, can expose truths no one is ready to hear. The restaurant had that kind of lighting that flatters everything. Faces, flatware, intentions. I remember the crisp white tablecloths, his fiancée's gentle perfume, the polite laughter of her parents. And I remember myself, trying to fit inside the role of proud mother, a small envelope tucked in my purse with a modest check to help with wedding costs. My way of saying, I believe in you, but he had a different idea of what help meant. My son has always wanted to impress the world. As a kid, he'd tell his classmates our old car was vintage, not used. I thought it was charming. Looking back, I see that trait, the hunger to be admired, never left him. It only changed clothes. The server poured champagne. Before I could raise my glass, he stood. He tapped the fork again, eyes shining the same way they did when he won ribbons at school. I want to make a special toast, he said, and the room hushed. His fiancée smiled. Her parents straightened in their chairs, and something inside me clicked into alert, the quiet radar mothers have when a line is about to be crossed. Tonight is about coming together, and I want to be transparent, he began, grinning. My mom, she never talks about this, but she's been smart with money. She sold the old house, invested, saved. She's got a cushion that means we'll never really have to worry. Forks paused midair. Laughter froze. I felt that same tilt I felt the day we buried his father, a mix of disbelief and a silence that doesn't know where to land. He kept going, convinced he was praising me. He talked about accounts and returns, about how I had more than I let on. He even said a number. Not exact, but close enough for his fiancée's mother to inhale sharply, the kind of small sound that gives desire away. I wanted to stop him, joke it off, pretend he was kidding. But he was buoyed by the moment. He truly believed he was bringing us closer. He thought revealing my life was an act of trust, and I sat there thinking about how many years of quiet and effort were being poured onto the table like a bottle of wine everyone was invited to sample. She's amazing, he said, slipping an arm around his bride. She's always said she'd help when I started my life. Now it's official. People smiled. His fiancée thanked me, teary. Her parents toasted our generous family. And I, who have always believed that love lives in the subtext, realized their world preferred big golden captions. While glasses clinked, one question hammered in my chest. When did my love become a resource? I looked at him, my boy, and saw for the first time a stranger. Not the cruel kind of stranger, but the true kind. A man I helped shape who never learned the weight of silence. Maybe that was my fault. I'd tried to protect him from everything, even consequences. After the toast, he sat and gave me a conspiratorial look as if to say, "Nailed it, didn't I?" I smiled back, the kind of smile mothers learn when they're trying to save the night. We finished dinner in curated peace. We talked about travel, home decor, their future. Inside, I kept repeating the same line. Don't say anything, don't ruin it. But it was already ruined. Words don't go back in bottles. On the ride home, the Uber driver asked if our night had been good. It was eye-opening, I said. He laughed, thinking it was a joke. I stared out the window, watching city lights multiply across the glass, and thought of how money does that too. Multiplies reflections and blurs what's real. At home, I kicked off my shoes, switched on the kitchen lamp, and set water to boil. The kettle hissed like it understood contained rage. I sat at the table and pulled out the fireproof box that holds my most important papers, pages that, for years, reminded me security isn't luxury, it's survival. There was the will I'd drafted when his father died. Simple, direct, full of good intentions. Back then, all I wanted was to guarantee my son would never stand where I had stood. That night, a different truth cut through me. Too much protection can blind. I picked up a pen. The paper seemed to breathe under my fingers. The words came calm, deliberate. I wasn't writing in anger. It was something else, an urgent need to recognize myself inside my own decisions. "This will revokes all prior wills," I wrote. And then, line by line, I gave meaning back to what was mine. As I wrote, a memory slipped in. His father laughing in the kitchen, hands still greasy from the garage, saying, "You don't teach value by talking money. You teach it by what you do when no one's watching." He was right. And that night, for the first time in a long time, I was doing exactly that. Outside, wind tapped the windows. Inside, a quiet clarity settled. Not happiness, clarity. When I finished, I folded the paper carefully and slid it beneath my pillow. I lay down, but didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and thought of my son's small hand once wrapped around my finger. I thought, "I gave you the world, my love, but you still have to learn how to deserve it." Maybe that is a mother's fate, to learn that the love that raises must also learn how to step back a little to keep teaching. I closed my eyes and heard the fork ring against the glass again, but this time it sounded different. Not an offense, a summons. A reminder that sometimes what hurts is what finally wakes us. There, in a quiet house, I promised myself, the next time he wants to show what we have, he should show who we are. Money can buy comfort, but not dignity. Dignity is the inheritance I chose to leave. The next morning, the silence was louder than any noise from the night before, as if the house were embarrassed to be seen and hid inside its own walls. Strips of pale light cut across the room, the kind that don't warm. They just expose dust. I sat on the edge of the bed, the newly folded will on the nightstand, and stared at it the way you study a fresh wound. My phone buzzed with his texts. "Morning, Mom. Last night was amazing. They loved you." I read but didn't respond. His words had a weight I couldn't lift yet. It's a strange thing, feeling love and disappointment in the same square of your chest, two hearts beating in opposite directions, one trying to forgive, the other trying to understand. I drifted to the kitchen. Coffee rose through the filter in a thin, patient stream, as if it knew I needed time. As the aroma settled over the room, I felt a kind of mourning. Not for money lost or embarrassment, but for something harder to name. The loss of innocence between mother and son. I had always believed there was a place inside him where my story was sacred. That place had cracked. The wall clock ticked with stubborn precision, a sound that felt personal now. Each click a reminder that time isn't kind to those who need to think before they act. My husband used to say, "Time is fair, never gentle." That morning, it showed me how long I'd ignored myself while caring for everyone else. For years, I mistook sacrifice for love. I believed giving everything was the same as loving fully. Maybe that's how I became the woman he described, the mother who saved, who held things together, who had a reserve. He didn't know what it cost to build. Every dollar in that account had a memory. Shifts I took when my body begged for rest. Clothes I didn't buy so I could pay for the class he wanted. Dinners invented from what was left in the fridge. None of that lives in a number tossed across a table. Numbers are treacherous. They carry the weight of labor, but not the sound of the breathing that earned them. I wrapped my hands around the mug and realized I wasn't just hurt. I was tired. Tired of being the fixed point, the guarantee that Mom will figure it out. Tired of being the harbor for someone who never learned to swim. I used to find nobility in that role. Now it felt like a cell with golden bars. I know he didn't mean harm. That's what splits me open. Love that wounds without intending to is the slowest to heal. He wanted to make me proud, to show the world he didn't need to be afraid, that their future was bright. But in doing so, he put the most private thing I owned on display, the part of my life that existed because I learned to survive without witnesses. Later, I texted, "Can we talk?" He replied almost instantly, "Of course, Mom. What time?" "Coffee at 10, our usual place." "Perfect." Our spot was on the corner near the park, the same diner we used to hit after his father's doctor visits when I had to invent smiles so my boy wouldn't see how close endings can be. The place where, years ago, he told me he'd gotten into college, and I cried into my napkin. And now we were there again. The same booth, a new kind of silence. He arrived in a rush, still boyish at the edges, comb marks in his hair, a smile trying to do what words couldn't. He hugged me quick. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm working on it." He laughed, nervous. "Last night was incredible, right? Everyone said you looked like a queen." "Queens aren't put on display," I said. He blinked. "What do you mean?" "When you talked about my savings, about what I have, you turned something intimate into something public. You thought you were honoring me. But what you did was set my life out like a trophy." He went quiet. The server slid our coffees between us. "I spent half my life thinking if I gave everything, I was protecting you," I said. "Now I see I may have taught you to confuse love with unlimited access. Love needs boundaries to stay love." He stared at the steam rising between us as if it were a curtain. "I just wanted them to see how incredible you are." I got carried away. "I know." I touched his hand. "That's why it hurts, because you did it out of love. But love without care can be a kind of carelessness." He exhaled. They got excited. Said we could get the house sooner, invest in more. "And did that sound good to you?" "In the moment, yeah. After..." I felt off. That feeling is truth after euphoria. We sat with it. The clock over the register clicked softly, marking a new kind of time between us. It felt like forgiveness was dissolving into the coffee. Slow, sweet, inevitable. He told me he was reworking the wedding budget. Smaller, more intimate. He wanted to pay for it himself, even if it took longer. I listened without applause. I've learned that sometimes support is quiet. You give someone space to hear themselves. "I don't want you to think I used you," he said, voice younger than his years. "I don't," I said. "But I want you to stop using yourself to fit other people's expectations. That's the worst kind of waste." He nodded, eyes wet. "You always know what to say." "Not always," I smiled. "Last night I almost yelled. Then I remembered. Real love waits for the moment the other person can hear. Have you felt that? That tender calm when something begins to mend but still aches? When your heart knows it's walking in the right direction, even if it stumbles?" When he left, the house felt different. The clock still ticked, but it no longer mocked me. It matched my breathing. On the way to the bedroom, I noticed the chrysanthemums he'd brought had opened a little more. Maybe coincidence. Or maybe flowers can feel a weight lifting too. I set a photo on the living room table. Him and his father building a kite, fingers sticky with glue, laughter blurred mid-flight. I studied his father's smile. Tired, hopeful. A smile I understand now. Sometimes caring for someone means letting them get it wrong. That afternoon, heat hung in the house like a thought that won't let go. The curtains, usually buoyed by a cross breeze, clung to the windows. Light went greenish in that way the sky does when it can't decide. The clock kept up its ritual. Then, with a dry pop, the power cut out. The fridge went mute. The kettle's courage failed. Street noise blurred behind the glass. I was alone with a silence I had avoided for years. I opened the drawer of the old sideboard. The wood smelled like confessions, and felt my way through folders of taxes, receipts, letters the years should have swallowed. My fingers found a thin brown envelope with my handwriting. Return. Year he got sick. I stood by the window where there was still a scrap of light and broke the seal as if I were waking someone. A small stack of slips slid out, clipped together with a rusty binder clip. On top, a note in pencil in a hand I would know even in the dark. His hand. "If you're reading this, love, I didn't get to show you in time." I felt my pulse stutter. "I covered small storms," he'd written. "Tickets for our boy. Fees I paid from what was left at the shop. Impulse buys I covered so he wouldn't feel small. I did it out of love, maybe pride. I thought I was protecting him, but I see now I taught him the world gets fixed at checkout. If I don't get back to undo it, please teach what I didn't. Love is not a rescue. It's a crossing." The paper smelled faintly of oil and dust, like his work pants. I could hear him fiddling with the screws in the wall clock, the same one stilled now by the outage. The past walked into the room, as it does, without knocking. And then the turn happened. The dinner table hadn't been the first time my son spent what wasn't his. It was only the loudest. Before that, there were softer scenes, tickets paid with jokes, bank notices muffled under hugs. I hadn't built that shadow alone. We had, his father with mercies, me with cushions. We taught our boy that love arrives without invoices, not out of malice, out of fear. Realization didn't shout. It entered like a draft that doesn't move the curtain but changes the air. I sat on the floor, leaned my head against the couch, closed my eyes. Sounds sharpened, the far-off call of a street vendor, a restless dog, the sigh of a bus braking too late. The world went on above me while I stepped down a few stairs inside myself. I read the last line again. Don't let him mistake your strength for a mattress. Strength is a floor. Firm, not soft. The room thickened with presence. I wanted to say out loud, I'm still here. Now I know. Have you felt it? That soft click when the past stops being a movie and becomes a mirror? When you recognize yourself on the wrong side of the story, not as a villain, but as a necessary cog in the mechanism that now hurts you? I went to the kitchen by the memory of textures, the cold metal of the faucet, the chipped enamel of the blue mug, the rough dish towel that was never new, only inherited. In a smaller drawer lay his wristwatch, stopped since the hospital. A tiny scratch on the crystal from the day he scooped a puppy from traffic. I cupped it in both hands like a shy bird. The leather still remembered his wrist. I wound it out of habit. Nothing. I waited. 1, 2, 3 minutes. No miracle. And then the other turn arrived. I didn't need the watch to start again for the time inside me to fall into step. The doorbell cut the silence. He stood there with that half-smile, guilt braided with courage. Power's out across the neighborhood, he said, as if it excused what had to happen anyway. Can I come up? I nodded. He walked to the living room and stopped before the frozen clock. Funny, he said. That's how I've felt since that night. Hands stuck in the wrong place. I didn't smile. I motioned to the window's dull light. Sit, I said. I want you to read something. I put his father's note in his hands. He read slowly, lips moving like when he was little and needed to hear syllables to believe the word. I watched his eyes underline the invisible. When he finished, he leaned back and let his head rest against the wall. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was recognition. I knew he helped me, he said at last. I didn't know he hid it from you. He thought it was protection, I said. So did I, in other ways. Maybe we both gave you a cushion when what you needed was a map. He nodded with a new humility. I'm sorry, he said. Less a plea for forgiveness, more like returning a key. I grew up thinking being loved meant never feeling the hard floor. Now I see, sometimes it's the firm floor that saves you. Have you been in a room where the air shifts and you know you're not the person who walked in? I handed him the wristwatch. Try winding it. He laughed. Mom, it's not coming back. I know, I said. Feel the gesture. He turned the crown slowly, reverently. The tiny click sounded bright in the hush. In that almost dark, we accepted an inheritance that never sat in any safe. Some things don't return, and because of that, we learn another way to walk. Candles bloomed in neighboring windows. The faint sulfur of matches threaded the smell of someone baking despite the outage. The world hadn't stopped. It had simply lowered its voice so we could hear ourselves. He looked up, still holding the note. Can I ask for something? He said. Not money. A memory. Tell me a story about him that isn't bills or fixes or survival. I told him about the night his father danced me around the kitchen with no music, hiding his laughter because the radio had died during the chorus. He tilted his head as if he could see it playing on an old projector and smiled. That, he said, I can afford to keep. The power returned with a neighborhood sigh. The overhead light flickered twice, then held. The wall clock refused to start on its own, an actor waiting for a cue. I decided it didn't get to run the room anymore. I climbed on a chair, lifted it off its nail with both hands, and felt its weight surprise me. I carried it to the sideboard, the place where tools retire into relics. Here, I thought, you'll keep time differently. He watched, quiet. Is this a new beginning? He asked. It's a redistribution, I said. Time doesn't get to boss us. We choose when to listen and when to be still. Before he left, he slid the note back into its envelope with a care that wasn't his yesterday. I'll come by tomorrow, he said, so we can go over wedding costs. No audience, no captions. Bring bread, I said lightly, a tone I hadn't used in months. And the map, he smiled. The map, I nodded. When the door closed, I stood in the middle of the room and listened to nothing. The good kind, the kind you earn. The light was clean now, and the air smelled faintly of a rain that might or might not arrive. I buckled his watch around my wrist for the first time. The leather yielded. It didn't tell the hour, but it set a pulse. I felt its weight the way I feel words when I choose them, firm enough to remember, soft enough to move. I put the kettle on. Its first whistle caught me by surprise, bright and almost playful. I poured the water and let the steam rise like new handwriting in the air. Do you know that moment when, without spectacle, your home returns to you? When every object, even a stopped watch, seems to say, I don't control you anymore, I complete you. The next morning the world felt rinsed. Puddles held scraps of sky. I opened the windows gently, as if not to startle the day. The kettle sang. I wore the watch, not as a weight, but as a vow. Not to time, to myself. His father's note stayed on the table beside a dried flower, a small altar to the kind of wealth you can't lock away. Have you felt it? That odd serenity after the storm, when your heart finally understands that resisting pain only makes it stay longer? He texted, Tomorrow I want to show you the house plan. I ran the numbers. House plan. I repeated to the empty room, feeling a quiet pride, the kind that doesn't perform, just rests. He came by with a folder and a bakery bag. I brought bread, he grinned. And the map. We spread drawings across the kitchen table. A small house, big windows, a yard for air. No luxury, he said. Just space to breathe. His voice had changed, steadier, humbler. He pointed to a window facing east. For you, he said. So I remember to open the curtains early. We fell into a comfortable silence. Outside, a soft breeze moved the leaves like memories that had learned their place. You taught me a lot, he said quietly. I learned too, I said. Love doesn't have to be right to be true. He hugged me, a long, unhurried hold that dissolved old misunderstandings. He wasn't leaning to be carried. He was standing with me. After he left, the house didn't feel empty. It felt light. I walked the rooms, touching walls that had listened to so many versions of me. The saver, the crier, the hider, the one afraid to lose. Now, the one who understands. That evening, the sky settled into the color of good endings. I closed the door gently, and for the first time, wasn't afraid of the quiet. Inside me, everything was where it belonged, even what once hurt. I set the stopped watch on the sideboard beside his father's note and the wedding invitation they'd left behind. Together, they told a story. What was, what we learned, what's coming. Past, lesson, future. 3 times holding one another. Life is generous like that. It doesn't give back what it took, but it leaves understanding in its place. I've learned that true love doesn't prevent the fall. It teaches a way of landing. Forgiveness isn't a favor. It's how we set down what we no longer need to carry. Strength isn't resisting. It's accepting without breaking. I turned off the lamp and stood a moment, watching the faint glint of the motionless watch in the warm light. Even stopped, it shone. Maybe it was never meant to count hours. Maybe it was meant to remind me that everything heals on its own clock. I went to bed. The sheet met my skin with a cool hello. I closed my eyes and breathed. For the first time, the future wasn't a long highway, but an open field, a place where, finally, I could rest. And that's when I understood. Maybe the end had never been the end. If this story reminded you of someone, or of a part of yourself you thought you'd left behind, share it below. Sometimes the telling is what heals.